You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.
Welcome back to the podcast. In today's episode, we're going to look at culture under pressure. So in February 2023, the National Guardian's Office dropped a stark warning that the culture in ambulance service trusts across England was putting staff wellbeing and patient safety at risk. So fast forward to this year's culture review of ambulance trusts, and the findings are just as sobering. So according to the 2022 NHS Staff Survey, ambulance services scored below national average across all 7 people promise areas, including inclusion, well-being, morale and leadership. So over 14% of paramedics reported that their workload was directly damaging their emotional well-being. And in terms of speaking up, many staff raised concerns that they faced in intimidation, ostracism and indeed silence. So the review also highlights the ongoing issue with bullying and sexual harassment, poor line management and leadership style that often leans into command and control rather than compassion. So in today's episode, we're asking, does this report reflect experience working on the front line? Also, what's missing? And indeed, does genuine culture change look different when you're the one out there answering calls? So I'm joined today by Lee McLaren. Lee is a paramedic and practice educator working within the ambulance service. He has a focus on human-centric leadership and also advocating for compassionate, effective learning environments. So his work bridges both clinical excellence with the development of future healthcare professionals. Welcome, Lee, to the podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
It's fantastic to have you, actually. And I just wondered, we will put links to the culture review of ambulance service trusts in the show notes, but I just wanted to initially do really a check-in from your perspective, Lee, around whether the sense of morale and well-being from your perspective on the front line reflects your experience of the culture currently within the ambulance service.
I think overall, I would have to agree with what's been presented in the documentation is what we're seeing on the front line. I think there's definitely an issue with morale. There's issues with kind of the well-being and sort of kind of support at the moment. And I think everything at the moment with regards to the ambulance service is very much regards to performance and hitting targets and meeting those criteria. But I think there's a disconnect between those performance targets and and then the staff kind of morale and how they're feeling on the road at the moment. Yeah, it's just I think I can understand the pressures that the ambulance service senior leadership are under with regards to meeting those targets, because I'm assuming they would come a lot more from above. But there definitely needs to be a better balance between meeting those targets and actually dealing with meeting the sort of staff needs as well. I personally believe, I think we could probably improve our performances by focusing more on the staff. I think if we can specialize it, focus more on making sure that morale is high, staff are being supported and trained, and constantly being the forefront of any kind of vision within an ambulance service trust. I think that will reflect on the performance targets, because I feel like those staff will then want to meet those targets on their own accord rather than being kind of pushed that way.
Yeah, indeed. And as you were saying, almost caring for the carers more so, just leading through compassionate leadership and actually addressing morale, as you were saying, because historically, Lee, there really has been a command and control leadership style or indeed model within ambulance services, and maybe that feels maybe a little bit more like a military style. But could I get you to speak to whether you feel that still dominates, and it maybe what impact that has on culture on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely still, I think, a command and control style. Obviously, we still definitely need a command and control style within the ambulance service. Especially from the frontline point of view, when a crew is attending a time critical situation, a definite command and control style needs to be applied. And then when we look at the bigger things, especially stuff that you've witnessed in your career in terms of the London bombings and stuff like that, or major incidents, a command and control has its place. But when you kind of look at the definition of command and control, kind of leadership, it's supposed to be very short durations. It's not supposed to be a longevity, because it's exactly for that reason. It creates burnout and everything else. So command and control is there to take initial control of the situation, and then once it runs on top of things, it's then supposed to dissipate into another leadership style in order to follow. Or, for example, like with major incidents, once the major incident is over, we then command and control goes down. So I think, what we've seen recently with the ambulance services going through kind of really unprecedented times. We've experienced quite a lot in a very short amount of time. And the ambulance services had to be really adaptive to this. Big thing, obviously, with COVID about 4 or 5 years ago, wasn't it? And then we've now received, we no longer have winter pressures. It's constantly all year round pressures. We've got demands on the hospitals, more and more demands on the ambulance service. So we are in very much unprecedented times. And even though we try to I think the ambulance service still tries to use a command and control style just to try and keep on top of the demand. I just don't think it's a very effective style anymore. There's a Professor Keith Grint. He came out with this kind of definition of something called wicked problems. And wicked, basically, he defines wicked problems being, stuff that we haven't experienced before. Therefore, there's no correct answer for it, and it relies on collaboration and with everybody to formulate a plan. And I've no doubt there is collaboration going on, but I think it's too higher up in the senior kind of leadership that are having that collaboration. And actually, it's about having collaboration from the people on the ground who are actually living and dealing with it day in, day out. There's a great book called Turn the Ship Around with Captain David Marquet, and he talks about specifically of pushing the authority down towards the information. So having that, the paramedics on the front line, they have the information, they can see what's going on, and they probably have a lot of ideas that could try and help things. So giving that authority, maybe pushing that authority downwards towards members of staff, and actually forming collaborating groups for that would probably be a good option. Because I think you're opening up your idea bank by having more and more voices in there. So yeah, I think that's kind of direction I think we should be looking at. And we mentioned about the British Army and stuff, and they use a concept called commander's intent, where the senior rankings will kind of give the outcome of what they want to achieve. They give the boundaries in terms of where they want to work in, and then they kind of push that authority down and go, it's down to you guys to kind of achieve it. And I think that's worked really well, and it was worked for the army for centuries, sort of thing. So I think that's something that we could look at within the ambulance services, like say push that authority down, have more collaboration with people on the ground actually seeing it day in, day out, and working together as a team.
Listen, I agree with that, and like you said, the information and indeed the lived experience is on the front line. So resourcing that, to your point, Lee, and actually echoing those voices in senior leadership teams, so bringing frontline clinicians into meetings and really getting a steer from the front line is absolutely, like you said, fosters far much more inclusive leadership, and it looks like it would really benefit both the culture and the morale. Lee, just pivoting slightly and looking at the speaking up culture. The report does say that many staff who speak up face intimidation or indeed inaction. Have you, or indeed someone experienced that? And in a way, how do you think we could sort of turn that around?
Yeah, I think you're kind of seeing it all over the place in terms of the NHS, aren't you, of this sort of concern of people being able to speak up freely and actually raise concerns. We're starting to see a lot more in the news about whistleblowers and everything else, and people want to kind of speak up for the good reasons, to try and initiate sort of changes for the better. But I don't know. I think there is still barriers there. From what you read throughout the sort of the news and stuff, that there seems to be still barriers there for people to talk up. And most recently there's been reviews that have come out and news reports of sort of bullying culture and all that sort of stuff in there. So I definitely feel there's potentially still those concerns of people being able to freely speak up. It's funny enough, I actually looked at this as a part of my dissertation from my undergraduate, was looking at a just culture and how we could implement a just culture into the ambulance service. And most of my research came from the aviation industry, where they run it quite smoothly, and they've been deemed as like one of the most safest kind of organisations, and as well as like the gas and oil industries as well, because safety is their number one paramount. And I looked at how principles from their just culture could be implemented in the ambulance service. And there needs to be a focus on when an incident comes up or when someone wants to report something, is a case of not looking at casting blame on the individual, but looking at the systems. What system failings, because let's face it, none of us go to work to harm anybody, so when something has happened or there's been a mistake or whatever, it's not intentional. 99.9% of the times it's not intentional. So we shouldn't be looking to cast blame straight away. We need to be looking at the systems involved with that, to try and see if we can identify if there was a problem and then change the system. I think from my dissertation, a lot of it came down to potentially there might need to be some kind of external investigation team, so it takes out that kind of biased opinion or that sort of involvement within the service to be involved, by having sort of like influence and all that sort of stuff. So having an external investigation team to deal with it, they've got non-bias, everything is kind of across the board, and they're looking at it from a systems point of view rather than, like you say, casting blame. I think that can work quite well. So yeah, I think there still needs to be a lot more work for it, just to be able to open up. And I think that also as well, I think when it comes to kind of reporting issues and safety concerns, I think there should be a better structure for not just learning from mistakes within our own trust, but also as a national thing. So learning from other trusts as well, what stuff goes on, and then implementing that, because one thing that happens in one trust could benefit another trust, and everyone's kind of working together. Because at the end of the day, we are. It's not just individual trusts working independently. We're all supposed to be all under obviously the AACE as well, in terms of working together. So yeah, I think there needs more work definitely, and I think that's what would be a good starter.
So just pivoting and looking at, and I'd really be interested in your perspective on this, Lee, because you're a practice educator, and so you're really mentoring students as they're coming through. But almost 15% of ambulance staff say their workload was damaging to their emotional well-being. And how do you envisage, mental health could be protected in the future, or indeed safeguarded more so? And you're really seeing this, I guess, within a student population. But how could we approach mental health differently?
I think overall, and I've experienced this myself. The toll of the job is taking its toll on staff. It's 12 hours and sometimes more of back-to-back jobs, and because of the huge demand on the service and whatnot, and the pressures that everyone's facing. Sometimes staff are going through without any breaks. Staff are constantly working, and it's day in, day out, and there's no kind of gap. There's no kind of chance to kind of sit back and just have a moment to yourself to decompress. So yeah, I believe the general kind of load on the ambulance service is taking its toll from what I see and stuff. I think it's a difficult one, because it is, and I can understand the pressures of above, trying to run an ambulance service under these constraints and stuff, and I get it. It's very difficult. Yeah. It's a difficult one to try and do. I think that there needs to be. I know, for example, our ambulance trusts are currently going through a massive rota review to try and ease that burden on people. So they are looking to kind of cut down on the amount of night shifts on staff, giving more adequate breaks in between, rest days in between. So I know our trusts are trying to make a big effort to try and improve that. So we are currently going for that, which is good to see. We have a lot of services, again, especially in our trust, and probably the same throughout the UK, in terms of like trims and stuff. I believe trim should be. I don't agree how the trim's currently working at the moment. I think that needs to be improved, because a lot of time when you ask for a trim assessment, it's usually done by a senior person, so a line manager and stuff like that. And I think it's sometimes very hard to open up properly to somebody who's above you. I know trim came from obviously the military side of things, but they kind of deal with it on a like-to-like basis. So a soldier will speak to a soldier, a corporal will speak to a corporal. So if everything's on the same line. So I think we need to probably involve trim from every level within the ambulance service. So people, it's similar to like the mental health first aid kind of stuff. They need to kind of have that across the board throughout the ambulance service, just so people can talk, because the mess room is the perfect place really to talk and get everything out. And I think that's kind of everyone's kind of place of safety a little bit in the mess room, where they can just open up, talk about jobs, and sometimes just speaking to more of senior paramedics in that room who've probably seen it all before and getting their perspectives and stuff. There needs to be, I think, kind of rolling back to your question, I think, trying to implement more downtime to allow that decompression space, I think would help generally with that.
Let's just look at inclusivity for a minute, Lee. And according to the data, less than 54% of ambulance staff think career progression is fair. And then for ethnic minority men, it's less than 40%. But just from your point of view, how inclusive does the workplace really feel? And indeed, I guess to put a positive take on that, how could we improve that?
This was a question I had to really think about. I think there's, from what I see, there's definitely a lot more in terms of support for sort of like that, in terms of like we've got BME kind of support groups, we've got LGBT kind of support groups, and they are becoming more and more sort of open and stuff like that. So there's a lot more kind of awareness of that going on. I've never really kind of seen from my own experience whether there's been restrictions and stuff, not to my knowledge. Very much everything is kind of open to everybody. I believe. We're currently making some good adaptations, and it's something I'm looking into as a practice educator in terms of like neurodivergent students and stuff like that, to try and include them a bit more and actually understand them a bit more and stuff. So that's kind of something I'm kind of looking into at the moment. But I sometimes I feel like I think the biggest restriction within the ambulance service is the fact it's your grade that kind of provides the limitation. So a lot of times progression can only kind of happen once you're a paramedic, and then somehow the whole world opens to you once you're kind of a registered paramedic. Whereas the staff below, the technicians, the ECAs and whatnot, they're very limited as well. You can only stay on a truck and that is it. And I think we need to be looking at more and more options of what technicians and ECAs can do to kind of expand their kind of repertoire and actually open up them, because they come with a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge as well. And it's a shame that we have to restrict them just because they don't have a degree or a registration that stops them from progressing. Actually, within our trust, we've actually opened up administration roles, so station managers to technicians. So there's now an opportunity for them to start there, to start progressing, and then once they become a station manager, they can look at other kind of leadership roles, which is great to see. But I think there's a lot of wisdom below a paramedic, and I think we can utilize them a bit more and offer more options for them, definitely.
So something which really is within your wheelhouse, Lee, and you see quite a lot, and I'd be really interested to get your take on this actually, around whether training matches reality really. And as an undergraduate, and you're mentoring as a practice educator a lot of the time, could I get you to speak to really whether you feel that the training that undergraduates or indeed student paramedics are getting really prepares them for what the job has become currently?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is a conversation I've had a lot, and especially with our current students going through. I don't think so. I think it's still very much based on how we were as a paramedic 5-10 years ago. I think there needs to be more. I only recently just gone through my training to become a paramedic myself. So I qualified nearly 2 years ago now. And it was very much that there were certain changes being implemented within that university where it was more looking towards a primary care paramedic. That was kind of the direction, looking at minor injuries, minor illnesses, looking at more when it came to like drugs and pharmacology. It was very much looking at primary care medications, so diuretics and diabetes and hypertension medications. So there is starting to get a little bit of a change, but the biggest thing I kind of see from a gap between theory and practice is those more kind of complex sort of stuff that we go to, and more so more regularly, the mental health kind of jobs, the complex mental health jobs, the complex medical problems with chronic conditions that we are seeing, not so much in the elderly anymore, but as they're starting to come down in their 50s, their 40s, we're starting to see these chronic conditions. And also, I think the big thing is social problems. I don't think there's much. Well, I can't remember any kind of formal training where, in terms of looking at social problems, homelessness. The fact that we're going to people now that can't keep their heating on because of bills and financial difficulties. I guess the question to ask is, should we be going to these sort of things? But we are, and we need to be kind of trained to do that as well. So yeah, it's interesting because recently with the students, I kind of see, they can go to a patient with chest pain and respiratory problems and cardiac arrests and everything else, and they can absolutely nail it. Very knowledgeable stuff, and it's just implementing that practical side of things. But yeah, when it comes to those complex where patients have multiple comorbidities or just dealing with massive life issues, that's where the challenge is. And even from practice educators' point of view, for myself, I'm trying to think, well, how can I turn this into a lesson to take away from it? It's challenging. It's definitely challenging. So yeah, I agree. I think we need to continue moving with the times within paramedic training, especially with our students. That kind of needs to continue progressing, but also within the service, I think there needs to be more and more training opportunities to speaking to experts to get their insight and to help continue professionally developing our staff as well.
So one of the recommendations, Lee, from the report is to have a registered paramedic on every trust board. Just from your thoughts, do you think that kind of representation would help the frontline feel heard, or in your thoughts, is leadership still kind of too far removed from actually what's happening on the frontline?
Yeah, so I agree. I think there needs to be paramedics on every board, especially with an ambulance service, that they have a place to do. And I know certain trusts have been doing that. I know Welsh Ambulance Service have got that implemented in there, and they're making some fantastic stuff. And the CEO, who's now gone over to London, he's made some incredible changes to the ambulance service and stuff like that. So it's good to see. And I think he was, bringing in a paramedic onto the board has made some big changes. I personally feel, that I think there is a bit of a gap between the top and the bottom. I think we have got paramedics throughout kind of leadership management, but I'm assuming because of workload and everything else that they're having to deal with, there should be an opportunity for them to come out onto the road and actually do more ride outs and remember to be a paramedic, and see patients and just kind of get a view from what is currently happening on the ground. So it's good. It's good to see. I definitely agree that paramedics need to be on boards and having their implement their ideas and stuff and what they've experienced over their time. But yeah, there also needs to be, those senior leaders need to be coming out onto the roads and keeping that essence of what they did in back in the day, of keeping that going, I think.
So just looking at career progression and development, Lee, in your mind, is there a clear path forward for you in this job? Because as has been spoken about many times, is this, unless you're a paramedic, and even indeed when you're a paramedic, it might still be quite linear. There's not as many options. I think there are hopefully more and more options opening up as time goes on. But could I get you to just unpack from your thoughts, really, if career development feels like something only a lucky few can access, or from your anecdotal experiences, has it been quite often that there is opportunities that arise?
Yeah, I definitely think it is a lot better now. There's definitely a lot more options. And so starting with, obviously, within the ambulance service, and you can see the work from the College of Paramedics. They've opened those doors quite early on. So it used to be kind of like, well, as a paramedic, you used to go either down the clinical route and work your way up as a specialist and advanced paramedic, or you went into management and kind of follow up from there. Now we're kind of seeing those opportunities now where paramedics are now going into a research. A lot of research opportunities. within our trust, we've got a massive research and like auditing department now, and they're doing some incredible work within the trust, and that's good to see. And you can see that starting to spread. A friend of mine that was on my course, she's gone straight into research, and she's doing a lot of stuff. So, and she's kind of balancing that between working frontline and doing research. So she's getting the best of both worlds, which again, that's a great thing to see. Or you can go down the education route. So there's definitely a lot more in terms of, from a paramedic's point of view, there is a lot more options available to you within the ambulance service. I guess the only thing that it would be great to sort of see, and again, we're starting to see a little bit more within our trust as well, is a bit more kind of having a mixed model. So having some time on the road. We've now got paramedics going into our control centre to work as part of our clinical advisory team. So they're on the phone, so they're getting additional training. There's always been talks about moving paramedics to GP practices, to urgent care centres, and having that rotation model. I think that's the next step we need to be looking at, because I think that will help with morale. I think that will help with just general well-being of just having a change of scenery. It's additional training and opportunities, and they're potentially going to be seeing patients that they wouldn't see within the ambulance service. So yeah, I think from an ambulance point of view, we're definitely going in the right direction, and I think that's something we can definitely progress on. And I think the issues that we are seeing now is the fact that because paramedics are being respected and seen as a very useful entity to loads of different things, we are losing a lot of paramedics from the ambulance service into other areas of the NHS or even outside of the NHS. And actually it's true when a mentor told me that once you're a paramedic, the world is literally your oyster. You can do absolutely anything. You can work on ships, you can work on oil rigs, you can work for the UN and all this sort of stuff. There's so many options that a paramedic can do, and I just think that also can be a bit of a problem for the ambulance service, because we're just not retaining the staff. People do just want to go, and who probably find that 24-hour workings and night shifts and weekends is probably not their bag, and they want to go and work in GP practice a bit more Monday to Friday 9 to 5, which is fine. But if the ambulance service, I think, want to kind of keep their staff that they've spent all this money on to try and train, and we need to focus on more ideas to retain them. And I think having more options available to you within the ambulance service, looking at these mixed models or looking at other opportunities that we can develop within the role, I think it would be a good position to be in, for sure.
So just looking at, we've got 3 more questions really. One would be, and it's a challenging question actually, Lee, around something that's denoted in the report around bullying and harassment. Could I get you to really just maybe speak to whether you've witnessed it, whether it's part of your lived experience within the ambulance service, and indeed maybe how the trust could handle these situations differently?
I think we've seen in the news, especially more recently. There's been obviously really kind of harrowing reports of bullying and sexual harassment and stuff like that, and it's a shame that we are kind of seeing this within our trust and whatnot, and it definitely is something that needs to be addressed. People say like that, the bullying culture has kind of been ongoing for years, and there's been no change, and I don't agree. I've no doubt there's that culture is still there, but I think we are definitely improving on that, but potentially just in a bit of a slower rate, and we definitely need to look at more opportunities to do that. And I think that kind of goes back to the initial question of earlier on when we talked about having more of a chance to speak up and actually be listened and taken on board. Don't get me wrong, I think we managers are not dealing with it. I think again it's just their workload that they're having to deal with, and it's difficult to say. It's like you're trying to prioritize what you've got already to try and deal with everything else, because dealing with something like that, a bullying issue or harassment thing, even though it's highly prioritized, we need to highly prioritize it, but it's going to take a lot of time away. So I think that comes back down to the idea of potentially having some kind of external or a different team that kind of deals with that specifically. But yeah, I definitely feel that we need to have a zero tolerance to that kind of stuff in the culture. We don't need this, and the job's hard enough when we're having to deal with bullying, and sexual harassment within that. And there's been, it's, I've seen it, and seen it within our trust, but and my trust is very good. They are kind of dealing with it quickly and trying to eliminate it as best they can, but it's hard work, but yeah, it's a difficult one, that one.
Yeah, indeed. No, indeed, indeed. Lee, just if we could pivot slightly and just look at line management really. And one of the key findings within the report was, many staff don't have regular access to a line manager or don't feel like they have access. Could I get you to speak to your anecdotal experience of being supported by your immediate leadership? It may not be your lived experience actually. And how do we, to coin a phrase that you used earlier, sort of turn the ship around so that people do feel like they have immediate access to their immediate leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like we've had a new structure within our service now, where our station manager, we have station managers now who are kind of our first point of call now, which is great because initially it was trying to get hold of a duty commander and stuff like that, and then they've got enough to deal with in terms of performance and operational demand. So it was very hard to try and keep that connection through. And now we have station managers who we report to, and we can liaise our concerns to them, and they are kind of like our overseers to try and get things sorted. So that's definitely been a good thing. Yeah, in terms of from my experiences, I've had some managers that have been absolutely fantastic, and really supportive. And a year or so ago, I had a lot of personal issues that I needed support with, and my line manager was fantastic. There was no questions asked. To the point where I said, no, I'm happy to come to work. She goes, you're not coming in. It's already been done. You're not even on the rotor anymore. I was like, right, so. As I say, they say that line manager was absolutely fantastic, and I can't fault anything. She was there for me, and she supported me, and and it just shows as well. If you have a manager that really supports you, you will then go above and beyond to help them back and stuff, which just shows that why compassionate leadership is so important. And then I've had line managers that have been kind of invisible and they're not really there, and you can see the difference. I can see the difference between the two, which kind of shows it's. That is from what the report is saying, that there needs to be more kind of leadership development with those teams, because having a really, really good manager that's always there to an invisible one is a character trait. It's not a training trait. It's definitely, they're just a nice person and whatnot, and the other person's got other character traits. So that's where I kind of feel like there needs to be more progress on leadership development. And I believe it's kind of going on, but I always find leadership is not like you do a course and that's it. You're a leader. It's a lifelong thing. And I know, like Simon Sinek, for example, uses that. Leadership. You're a student of leadership. Like we are students of paramedicine. You're constantly day in, day out, living and breathing it, in terms of reading about it, to having conversations with people, having that mentor support as well. A lot of people that go into a leadership role is a case of who's mentoring you. Who do you go to when you have a leadership problem? And I think on top of all the work that they have to do, I probably don't think it's there. So if they've got a problem, they just kind of either deal with it and right or wrong and see what happens, sort of thing. So yeah, I definitely feel there needs to be more kind of leadership development. I think it needs to be more than just attending a course or a weekend. There needs to be an actual infrastructure of leadership within the organisation where people can go for support as well for them.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely so. And I firmly agree with that, actually, Lee. So just to finish off, on the conversation, and it's been wide ranging, and I think we've addressed the majority of topics from the report, really. Just finally, from your perspective, Lee, what keeps you going in this job? And indeed, what would make it easier to stay despite rota pressures, despite cultural issues, despite everything we've discussed? Is there anything that would kind of just fundamentally make it easier to stay?
Quite an interesting question, isn't it? Because like I say, everyone kind of sees what we go through, and everyone says, "Oh, how incredibly stressful," and I couldn't do your job and stuff like that. And we all moan about the job and how hard it is and how broken we feel and burnt out. but yet we still come in day after day to do it. And I think when you look at it, and I always ask this question of all my students as well, and just people, it's been new staff that come on board. It's like, what made you want to be here? And it's 9 times out of 10, it's the same thing. Because I want to care for people, I want to help people, and it's true. We are a very caring bunch of people. Throughout the whole NHS, we do it because we care. We want to help people, or we've experienced it when we were younger, seeing what our family members were really poorly, and somebody in green turned up and made them all better. And it's those experiences. I think that's why we do it. For me, I I like it. I like working with my crewmates. My crewmates are amazing. I'm at a new station at the moment in more of a rural area now. When I used to work in the city, I now work up north, and I'm in like the sticks of everything. And yeah, my crewmates on my station are brilliant. They're just a morale in a box sometimes, and yeah, that's what brings me back to work every day. I could have a really bad day, and I can just speak to some crewmates, and then they just turn you around very quickly. So yeah, for me, I enjoy the job. I really do enjoy the job. I enjoy going to those patients who actually really need us, and we make a big difference. And we've taken somebody who's from a very chaotic situation, and we've changed it around, and we've helped them, and we've got them to a place that they need to be. And I receive those, like the odd occasion I get like these compliment slips saying thank you very much. That means a lot. Few and far between, but those little bits they come in, it's like, yeah, that's why I do the job. But yeah, obviously you've got that new film that's just come out. Was it Code 3? I don't know if you've seen that yet, but that was brilliant, because it just really hit home everything. Even though he was, I don't want to ruin it for everybody who hasn't seen it, but he was a burnt out stressed paramedic, and he decided to leave, and then he came back because it was like, yeah, this is my calling. And it is true, we do. It's like an addiction.
Yeah, no. Yeah, absolutely. And like to your point, it almost is a vocational calling, and you're right. It can't be, not to say money isn't important, because it is, but it's not necessarily the driver or the only driver to be showing up to work. Lee, listen, that's been a fantastic, wide-ranging conversation. It's been great just to get your lived experience, really, and your thoughts across multiple parts of that report. We'll put the report in the show notes for people to read and go away and look at. But it's been just great to unpick your brain on some of these really sticky, really difficult topics. So thank you so much, mate.
No, thank you. Thanks for inviting me on. It's been an absolute pleasure talking. Thank you.
You're listening to the Pre-Hospital Care podcast on the Medics Academy Network.